or how so on. So talking about it is actually one of the first important steps.
I totally agree. I think that's the awareness. It's not like you mentioned, those are all common sense. You list out like up, I think 9 pages of things that we can do. It's not like we're not knowing what to do. It's just the awareness, right? The
Exactly.
acknowledgement of, okay, oh, actually, we should actually do this way instead of.
High temperatures in England, and when they had fish and chips, it turned out the potatoes were a half inch shorter. People noticed they weren't the normal size because of the drought. I already mentioned rice. There's other sides.
May you
Yes.
add more about the rice, because rice is a staple for more than half of the human population, together with wheat and other cereals.
Right. Rice is also changing both, as I mentioned, vitamins, essential minerals, and proteins are declining, will decline with increasing CO2. The other challenge for rice is, believe it or not, nighttime temperatures. When they warm, rice yields decline. And in some parts of the world, I was privileged to visit Vietnam, saltwater intrusion, which now extends 30 to 50 miles upriver because of sea level rise, in part because of sea level rise and other things, is compromising the production of rice, because rice is not very salt tolerant. So farmers are switching to other crops, but it's having a huge impact on rice production. Now, those are major issues, especially for a staple like rice. Others, wheat, corn, etc., and soy are also affected.
I think you mentioned the B vitamin, which is also essential for pregnant mothers,
yes,
pregnant women,
right,
in proper development of the child with the fetus.
Well, even for young people, the decline in protein content is another big one.
So I'll let you go back to the table in our future restaurant.
Oh, thank you. That rice is really important. That's a good question. So let's just move on to dessert. I mean, we can all think of our favorites. Chocolate. Most cacao comes from Western Africa, where drought and higher temperatures are taking a toll. Vanilla, mostly from natural vanilla. And here's another surprise. Most people don't realize that of the vanilla we consume, only about 1% is natural. The rest is synthetic. But most of that natural vanilla comes from Madagascar and the rest from Indonesia. But Madagascar has been hit with hurricanes and other extreme weather that's jeopardizing that natural vanilla production. Sugar, probably in general, okay, although a lot of it comes from sugar beets in Europe, and they suspect drought will take a toll on sugar beets. And I don't want to talk about the next one, but it's coffee. You know, with your dessert, you have a cup of coffee. It is sensitive. The plant is sensitive to changes in temperatures. Well, obviously it's warming. That stresses the plant. Rainfall is shifted in different parts of the world, so it doesn't rain when it should. And here's another one. You know, a coffee producer may lay the beans out to dry. Well, the unexpected rain means they have to rapidly cover them or whatever, where in the past they have plenty of sun and they could dry the beans for then moving on to the next phase. I think there's concerns about coffee because those who are trying to breed more resilient varieties need wild genetic material. And there's a few places around the world where these unique sort of wild coffee plants grow. They're little ecological niches, but they're being compromised by climate change, which means that genetic material could be lost in time. So coffee is an interesting story. It's also, I mean, millions of people grow it, ship it, produce it. I've forgotten the number of Starbucks coffee places are in the world, but it's a mind-boggling number. And it's also just one of those things. You know, I don't know if my heart would start in the morning if I didn't have a cup of coffee. So we cherish it, but it's in trouble.
I'll tell you something which we almost forget about it, but it's an essential part of the dinner table or a restaurant table, the paper napkin. And it comes from the trees.
Right.
And if we can, tell us a little story also about how the trees are affected by the climate change.
You mean other products or paper and so on?
Yeah, the paper products we use in restaurants, right? On our dinner tables.
Well, forests are obviously being affected by the devastating fires. Although not mentioned in my introduction, I actually have a PhD in entomology. I studied insects. So there's a very interesting story about what are called bark beetles in the western US, or now here in New York too, in the Northeast. The trees are under stress because of the drought, we know that, and higher temperatures. And the bark beetles now are more successful at basically attacking and drilling into these trees that are now weakened, and they kill them. But we're talking tens of thousands of square miles now of trees that are dead in the western US because of bark beetle damage. And now this is, as conditions warm, that's moving north. So that's going back to the paper napkin, compromising the availability of wood, although I think in general, that's not too serious yet, loss of trees and ultimately paper products, because we still have a lot of forest available. But Manuel, I wonder if I could go back a little bit to the menu. I've sort of put out a lot of challenges, and we'll get to this later, but I'll just go back to coffee. It's not totally lost. Farmers are planting shade trees, which keep the heat down so that the coffee plants aren't as stressed. And a side benefit of that is there's more bird life in the trees that feed on one of the main pests they feed on the main insect pest of coffee, the coffee borer. So it's sort of bringing back an ecological balance. And farmers are also planting coffee within existing forest. So the shade is there already. And again, it's a way of adapting to the new conditions. A lot of it is common sense, but I just wanted to come back to coffee because it is so important.
I subscribe to that. I'm, the gold card, the carrier of Starbucks, if that means anything.
Yeah.
Right. I guess it's not a problem if we're not really attached to the food, or because we evolve, right? We change our taste, and maybe there will be new food coming out. But the point is, there are, as you mentioned, food represents the culture deep in our DNA. There are things that we're really deeply attached to that we don't want to lose them. That came to the point how we preserve all these valuable resources to produce what we value, what we want to eat, what we're are meant to connect with as a culture wise. So I think that's definitely a scary thought, to think something no longer exists that you're really treasured. So in that sense, how can an individual, or let's start with the society, how can we, scientists, companies, institutions, to contribute to prevent that from happening, to make sure our menu is well stocked, and to make sure they can do something to change this?
Well, I always say with all the challenges, there's equal number of solutions or opportunities. So let's start with what we call the steward of the land, the farmer or the rancher. They're already, and I'll pause here because I was talking to an audience of farmers one time about something called climate smart farming. And that's where the focus is on soil health, which is sort of fundamental to any kind of crop production. You want to make sure it has plenty of organic matter. It's alive, because it's almost like an organism. Soil isn't just dirt. It's alive with billions of bacteria and worms and my specialty, insects, of course. But if you pick up a handful of healthy soil, you can almost feel the life in it. So it's not just something we walk on. So that's key, soil health. And in fact, for climate change, if you have a healthy soil and it rains, that water will percolate into the soil. So it's retained for when you have a drought, there is moisture there. In contrast, if it's not a healthy soil, it doesn't absorb the water. And then when the drought occurs, it's even more severe on the plant. So that's one part of climate smart farming, but there's a variety of other things. Let's say diversify if you can. So if you're only growing one crop and it's devastated by a drought or a hurricane or whatever it might be, you've lost everything. But if you've got 10 different crops grown in different places and so on, and you have some extreme weather, well, maybe 2/3 are going to survive. You still have an income. So diversification is really important. And farmers are already using really interesting tools. There's precision agriculture, where they pretty much assess the soil and moisture conditions across one field. I'll just say an example field. So they can then precisely irrigate the plants that need it most and not the others. They can drive their equipment across and plant and know where the fertilizer should be applied a little bit heavier and a little less, because they know the soil health across the entire field. So it's all driven by global positioning. So they're also precise in where things are planted and precise in how fertilizer and nutrients are added to the soil to help the crop. So there's a lot going on under this banner for farmers called climate smart farming. And after talking to a bunch of farmers one time, one came up and said, "Thanks, Mike, but that's not climate smart farming. That's common sense farming." It's like, hey, we're doing a lot of this already because we want to stay in business. So that's the stewards of the land, the farmers. So what are the scientists doing? What I see of great value about the telling of the story of food and climate change is also to bring in the value of science. So here we are. We need, number one on the list is more resilient crops. And that's happening all over the world. Scientists are breeding better varieties using traditional methods. You've heard of the different ones, whether it's salt tolerant, heat tolerant, drought tolerant. We need all those things, but also including nutritional quality of the plant to meet the new challenges of climate change. And included in the breeding program is genetic engineering. A lot of people get emotional about that, but when it actually comes to the consumption of genetically engineered crops, the National Academy of Sciences says, as far as consumption, there's no difference between genetically engineered and those created through traditional breeding programs. They're safe. Some of the implementation, how they're used, that's another issue, but it's sort of the bottom line. They are safe to eat. So many other things. There are also scientists are studying the soil. I have dear friends that do something called biochar. It's like charcoal. They put it in the soil and it really helps the health of the soil. There's a scientist at Cornell who is spreading broken rocks on fields because it absorbs carbon dioxide. So there's a lot going on in science to help keep that menu stocked. And finally, the industries. I recently heard one of the partners in one of the major wine industries in California mention, well, they're using lighter weight bottles for their wine. And when you think of the tens of millions of bottles, just a small increment in change means less energy, less glass, etc. They're also practicing climate smart agriculture. They now have devices they can actually put in a vine to let the farmer know when it's thirsty. An individual plant, when it needs water. So there's a lot of things that the industry is doing. They're looking at their own greenhouse gas footprints. There's another winery. Sorry, I'm focusing on the beverages, but that's where my mind goes. Instead of rinsing the big vats with water, with water, they now use ultraviolet. I can't explain it technically, but they clean the vats with a different technology that doesn't require water. So they're saving enormous amounts of water. These industries are water intensive. So I was asked once, okay, we're going to put up a new facility. Where should we put it? Well, there's a lot of places that are getting drier. So you don't even want to put up a new winery or distillery in certain places. And a lot of this is common sense. A lot of times there's a return on investment, investing in reducing energy use in your facilities, et cetera. So there is a lot going on from farmers, scientists, and those in the business of food.
So I would like actually, because we at AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, we're trying to bridge the digital transformation. And you mentioned bits and pieces. I just want to put them together. And also we focus on the role of digital transformation on sustainability and ESG. And I would also want to mention that Isabella wrote a book about our digital mind and how we can think about artificial intelligence and the use by humans and the questions we have to raise about using it ethically and constructively. But going back to digital transformation, it's almost, there are two sciences moving side by side. This morning I was listening to an intelligent Internet of Things conversation, and I asked the question of sustainability. Nobody seems to want to connect the two dots. And thank you because you did connect it. All these drones, all these sensors that we put in the ground, all the measurements we do with AI, with artificial intelligence, are coming back into what we call it Internet of Things. We call it digital transformation. We call it digitalization. So thank you for connecting the dots, and I encourage you to continue to connect them because technology also can help. And I'd like to, have a huge amount of time for continuing the dialogue, but I have a quick question before we move into the closing question. What can we do as individuals to really fight, not so much to fight, but to understand and to change our own destiny in the respect of climate change? Because it's our destiny at play.
There's many things we can do. In somewhat of a list and prioritized list, I think the first is for all of us to truly understand what's going on as best we can. Some refer that as being climate change literate. Things that we've talked about here, what's causing it. It's humans, it's not natural. The difference between climate change and global warming, things like that, but just understanding what's going on. And the outcome of that is then we can make more informed decisions about our personal choices, about how we get involved in different activities to bring about the changes that we need. But we sort of have a foundation to build from. Now I get it. I truly do. Believe it or not, one of the other things that's really, really important is to talk about it. Talk about climate change. In the US, 2/3 of the adults rarely talk about climate change. I didn't mention this early, but in our survey that we did, 75% of us talk about food. So can we make the connection that climate change is affecting food and get more people to talk about it? And there's also just some recent information released that although something like 70% of us in the US are concerned about climate change, when you ask, well, what do you think about others? They say, oh, probably about 30% are concerned. So there's a misunderstanding that people are really concerned, but we don't really reach out and say, how are you feeling about this? Or how, so on. So talking about it is actually one of the first important steps.
I totally agree. I think that's the awareness. It's not like you mentioned, those are all common sense. You list out like up, I think 9 pages of things that we can do. It's not like we're not knowing what to do. It's just the awareness, right? The acknowledgement of, okay, oh, actually, we should actually do this way instead of that. That's what's making the things started to changing, right? It's not really the methodology or we're lack of resources for information to proceed. So I totally agree. Just by sharing, by bringing awareness, it's almost the essential step to make a difference.
I call it the why. Why do you need to do all those things? Why do you need to talk about it more? Why do you shift to a more plant-based diet, etc.? Why to get involved? So there's a lot of things we can do. That's getting involved is one. And I think it's important also to appreciate where our food comes from. There are real people out there supplying us all over the world. And it's tough, not easy, especially now to be a farmer or a rancher. So, and the other thing is, it's not just food, it's also look at your carbon footprint. Do we need to have all this stuff? Do we need to fly? Do we need to drive, etc.? We all need to sort of step back and look at our lifestyle and what we can do to change and frankly, just simply reduce our emissions into the atmosphere. And we don't have a lot of time. We're down to about 88 months to make some dramatic changes. So it's just gonna get a lot hotter.
So Mike, actually, you ending with a very positive note. It is climate change is due to humans. We know that. I hope nobody will challenge this simple statement. But also, we as humans together can have a positive story at the end of this impending crisis. And I feel you're very positive about it. In conclusion, give us a positive statement about where we are. We talk about the science, we talk about the change, we talk about the understanding, the deep understanding, down to a coffee bean. I'll always remember when I drink a coffee about this. But what is the final positive message about climate and how we can really survive and thrive in our professions, in agriculture?
I'll offer two comments. One is we can confront climate change. I like that word confront, tackle, defy, face on, if we have the will. And look at the amazing things we've done with medicine, with engineering, with agriculture, et cetera. As a species, we've accomplished great things. We just have to decide we're going to tackle climate change. And more at the personal level, we all need to find a greater purpose right now. And I have a suggestion to what that would be. But our greater purpose should all be right now, among other things, but tackling climate change. Because we all need a purpose. And those of us privileged enough to be in a position to dedicate all of our time, I suggest that we should be doing, and all the rest of us who've got other activities and so on, still, we've got a huge challenge. It's time to find our greater purpose.
And I would like to thank you before I turn to, personally thank you. I would think, as I said, every time I go to sit at a dinner table at a restaurant, I'll think about how this food is produced, and we so far remote sometimes we forget about that. But I'll turn it to Isabella for final comment, and hope we'll come back for more food and climate stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But
Yeah, to wrap it up, I want to go back to your book, Mike. You mentioned about this greater purpose. Is that part of your inspiration to start this book, or is this your unique way to show how you, as an individual, contribute in this process? Share a little bit about that.
I mean, I've been involved in the climate change challenge for a long time, and one can quickly get overwhelmed. It's so big. Things are happening all around us. And I just discovered food is sort of the key. And that's what I focus on now. Isabella, could you repeat that again? I want to make sure
Is this part of your inspiration to find a greater purpose to start this book, or is any other reason make you start a book? And also, is this your personal, demonstration of how, as an individual, you can make a difference in shaping an environmental future?
Right.
Yeah.
All of the above.
So I summarized it for
going.
you.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I agree with what you just said that I should have said. No, I honestly, I just feel so privileged to be able to do what I'm doing, and I'm getting more and more enthused because I get that feedback from others that we're onto something big.
You
using
are.
Food.
You
and
are.
Again, I guess that's my point. It's a personal mission, and somewhere I say that's all I'm going to do until I can't do it anymore, and that's the way it is.
Is it on your website?
I don't know if that quote is, but
You
we
should
should
add.
add it. And actually,
Big part is missing.
I'm fortunate to actually see two book authors coming from different directions and discussing how you start a book, how you write, what is the core idea, what motivates you, and it's an arduous work. I know that Isabella, her book on AI and the digital mind, but I appreciate and I'm fortunate to listen to this dialogue going back and forth. I'm sorry, time is running out. We want you back, and I'll contact you to have you back on with another story. But Isabella, back to you for the final note.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for this very thoughtful and personal kind of sharing, and to relate us to how each person, each one of us are part of this sustainability topic, and it's actually very critical for us to continue living the life that we want to live. So thank you very much, and thank you to all our audience also for taking the time visiting us today, joining us on this conversation. Make sure you tune in every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talks series, where you can gain new perspectives on how to mitigate risks and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until the next week, thank you all and goodbye.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Isabella.
Thank you.
See you soon.